The streets of New Jersey were covered in the heavy silence of winter. The sky was gray, the trees stood bare, and the air carried a biting chill. Tony Soprano sat behind the wheel of his car, drawing in a deep breath. The events of the past season, his uncle Junior's betrayal, his mother Livia's cold smile, the looming shadow of the FBI, still weighed on his shoulders. But times had changed. With the death of Jackie April Sr., the empty seat of power was now officially Tony's. The reins of North Jersey rested in his hands. That morning at home, Carmela noticed this new authority etched onto Tony's face. His gaze was sharper, his words harder. As she set the table, she said, "You're officially the boss now." Tony slowly placed his fork down on the plate, his eyes locking onto hers. "Being the boss isn't easy. Everyone looks to you for answers, but no one carries your burdens." His words echoed through the house, but Carmela gave no reply. She knew as well as he did. In Tony's world, loneliness was inevitable. Later that day, Tony walked into Dr. Melfi's office. His expression was a mixture of anger and exhaustion as he sank into the chair. "Everyone's looking at me now," he said. "I make the decisions for all of them. But sometimes I just want to run away." Melfi listened in silence before responding softly. "For you, leadership means facing your own shadows." Tony lowered his eyes. In her words, his mother's shadow still lingered. This episode also marked another turning point. Richie April was out of prison. Jackie's older brother had returned to the streets after years inside, hardened like stone, filled with rage and ambition. For Tony, Richie's return was both a potential alliance and a dangerous threat to control. Richie's first scenes showed him reuniting with old friends on street corners. His eyes burned with anger. His mouth spat curses. "Everyone lived easy while I was gone, but now Richie's back." His words brought both smiles and unease to the faces around him. Richie's fury was indiscriminate. It could fall on enemies or friends alike. When Tony and Richie finally met, the atmosphere was tense. Richie tried to appear respectful, but his words carried subtle barbs. "Jackie was my brother. You may sit in the chair now, but don't forget, I'm still here." Tony's eyes hardened, but all he said was, "Welcome back." He knew too well, impatience was the greatest trap for a boss. Meanwhile, the FBI's pressure grew heavier. Cars lingered near the Sopranos' home. Strange clicks echoed on phone lines. One day, Meadow asked, "Why are there always men sitting in cars outside?" Tony forced a smile. "They're just bored cops." But inside, his fury burned hotter. The FBI's shadow had seeped into the innocence of his own household. At home, Carmela grew more cautious. She could feel Tony's power at its peak, but also the strain it placed on their family. One night in bed, she asked, "Will our end be like Jackie's someday?" Tony said nothing, dragging deep on his cigarette. He didn't know the answer himself. Christopher, meanwhile, burned with his own ambition. He was scribbling scripts, chasing dreams while still working jobs for Tony. One night he told Adriana, "My life won't just be in his shadow." But his eyes betrayed fear. Breaking free of Tony's shadow meant stepping closer to death. In this season opener, the balance of power was redrawn. Junior remained under house arrest, but he wasn't powerless. Around him were still men who despised Tony's rise. With Richie's return, that resentment found new fire. Tony's work was no longer just about business. It was about holding on to his authority. As a misty New Jersey morning slowly awoke, Tony sat in his car, silent. A scratchy tune played on the radio, while his eyes stared into the void. The recent turmoil had weighed even heavier on his shoulders. Junior was confined, but far from harmless. And one of Tony's heaviest burdens was still his mother, Livia. That morning, Carmela broke the silence at the breakfast table without meeting his eyes. "Your mother's in the hospital." Tony stayed quiet. Every mention of her name reopened old wounds carved deep in his chest. She was the woman who had darkened his childhood, who had shaped him with her lack of love. and now even frail and sick, she remained a looming shadow in his life. In the sterile corridors of the hospital, Tony walked with a heavy, unreadable expression. Livia lay in her bed, her face as discontent as ever, her lips curled in disdain. Tony stepped closer, his eyes a storm of anger and sorrow. Without lifting her head, Livia muttered, "They've locked me in here like I'm just waiting to die." Tony's breath quickened. He wanted to scream, to pour it all out, but the words choked inside him. In a hushed voice he managed, "If you only knew what you put me through." But there was no remorse in her face. Junior too remained a presence. Even confined, he schemed with his men, trying to corrode Tony's rise from the inside. For Junior, family ties had long since rotted into envy and rage. When Tony faced him, the air turned cold. With a mocking smile, Junior said, "You may hold the reins now, but that doesn't make you strong." Tony's eyes darkened, but he replied with patience, "Don't underestimate me, Uncle. Anyone who spoils my game won't be playing for long." Carmela, caught between them, struggled with her own conscience. One evening she told Tony, "No matter how much you hate her, she's still your mother." Tony snapped back, "A mother is supposed to give her children love." "What did she give me, Carm?" "Nothing but hate." Carmela fell silent, unable to deny the truth. Christopher's ambition continued to smolder. Running small jobs, trying to win Tony's approval, he whispered to Adriana one night, "One day my name will be as big as theirs." His eyes flickered with hope and darkness alike. In the mafia world, to rise was to bleed. In his session with Dr. Melfi, Tony finally let out the weight. "They tried to kill me," he said, "and my mother's hand was behind it." Melfi listened carefully, then said, "Perhaps your mother became the symbol of an unreachable love for you." Tony let out a bitter laugh. "Love? The only thing that came from that woman was poison." It was one of his rawest confessions about Livia. Later, in the hospital, the tension deepened. Doctors spoke of a "do not resuscitate" order. When Tony heard, a storm raged inside him. For all his hatred, the thought of losing her left an emptiness. He stood by her bed, staring at her pale face. The only words he could muster were, "I wish we'd had another kind of life." Without even opening her eyes, Livia whispered, "You never wanted me anyway." The words pierced Tony like a blade. As the gray morning of New Jersey slowly unfolded, Tony Soprano sat in his car, lazily dragging on a cigarette. The pressure inside him had only grown heavier in recent days. Junior was under house arrest. Livia lay confined to a hospital bed, yet Tony's world held no peace. Because from the shadows of the past, someone had returned from prison. Richie April. Richie had spent years inside, carrying with him rage, ambition, and vengeance. When he walked out of those prison gates, his eyes reflected only two things: pride and fury. Back on the streets, old friends embraced him, but everyone around Tony felt uneasy. Richie's temper, impatience, and recklessness were well known, and now he had stepped right back into the center of the new order Tony had built. From his first scenes, Richie's return could be felt. He looked around streets he hadn't seen in years. "This place has changed," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. When he crossed paths with Tony's men, the respect he received wasn't what he thought he deserved. Everyone knew Tony now held the reins. That reality bruised Richie's pride. When Richie and Tony finally sat face to face, silence thickened the air. Richie looked at him with a mocking smile. "I was here before you, Tony. Now I'm back." Tony kept his composure, but his eyes were sharp. "Times have changed, Richie. I'm in charge now. You need to adapt." Richie hated the words but stayed quiet, knowing well how much power Tony commanded. Richie's impatience soon revealed itself. On the streets, he shook down small businesses, but his methods clashed with Tony's rules. When he confronted Beansy Gator, a former hustler now running a clean pizzeria, Richie demanded tribute. Beansy refused. Richie's rage exploded. He beat him, hurled insults and later rammed him with his car, leaving him gravely injured. It was a brutal reminder of just how dangerous and uncontrollable Richie could be. When word reached Tony, his fury ignited. Sitting with Paulie and Silvio, he slammed his fist on the table. "I bled to build this order and now he comes back to wreck it." Silvio nodded grimly. "Richie's still living by prison rules. If you don't rein him in, he'll drag us all down." Tony's eyes burned with anger. Richie's violence wasn't just against one man. It was a direct challenge to his authority. At home, Carmela sensed the storm. One night in bed, she whispered, "Another storm is brewing." Tony didn't answer, but as he lit another cigarette, his distant gaze confirmed she was right. Richie's return was a warning of blood to come. Meanwhile, Tony visited his mother. Livia's face carried the same bitter discontent. "You know what you've put us through?" Tony asked. Her lips curved in a faintly mocking smile. That moment reminded him his wounds from her would never truly heal. Richie's violence spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Beansy's broken body in a hospital bed became the talk of the streets. When Tony heard, his rage erupted. "No one touches anyone without my say," he roared. Paulie and Silvio lowered their eyes. Everyone knew Tony's wrath was dangerous, but it was Richie who had drawn the lion's fury. The final scene showed Tony alone in his car at night. The darkness swallowed the streets, and he stared out the window with one thought. Richie's return wasn't just the comeback of one man, it was the beginning of a bloody war. Smoke from his cigarette curled into the night as the camera pulled away. His face was hard, unyielding, but the episode didn't end there. A heavy morning silence fell once more over New Jersey streets. This time Tony carried not just his territory's weight, but the burden of a much larger world. His path was about to stretch beyond Jersey, to the roots of the family itself, Italy. As he packed his suitcase, Carmela's eyes lingered on it. Inside were not just clothes but unspoken expectations. Tony, Paulie, and Christopher were headed for Naples to strengthen business ties and reconnect with their heritage. At the door, Carmela quietly said, "What you find there won't be any different from what you have here." Tony only bowed his head. She was right. On the plane, Tony stared out the window, shadows of the past swirling in his mind. Italy was both dream and stranger, his father's land, the family's roots. Paulie, giddy, flipped through magazines. "They'll treat us like kings over there," he said. Christopher stayed quiet, uneasy. He knew this trip was more than business. It was a confrontation with identity. When they landed, Naples overwhelmed them. Narrow streets, ancient stone buildings, the salty breeze from the sea. Paulie's eyes sparkled. "This is our homeland." Tony's gaze, however, was wary. He knew the same rules of power and money applied here, too. Their hosts were not what Tony expected. The leader wasn't a man, but a woman, Donna Isabella. Stern, commanding, her eyes sharp. At the table, she cut him off. "You may set the rules in Jersey, but here it's our word that counts." Tony paused, then nodded. "All I want is cooperation." Paulie was stunned, almost shrinking before the woman, yet in awe. Christopher, on the other hand, grew restless, trapped by language barriers and the alien city. One night, he knocked on Tony's door. "I feel lost here," he admitted. Tony glared. "We're not here for vacation. Get yourself together." But Christopher's unease remained. The negotiations dragged on, weapons, money, long-term deals. Tony stayed vigilant, sensing these Italians were older, deeper, and more ruthless than anyone back home. One scene with Paulie stood out. Walking Naples streets, he gazed around like a child. Restaurants, people, the sea shimmering nearby. But soon reality struck. Locals saw them as nothing more than foreign Americans. His wonder faded into disappointment. This so-called homeland was not theirs. Christopher's addiction reared its head again. Alone in his hotel room, he slipped into drugs. When Tony found out, his fury exploded. "I brought you here for business and you're destroying yourself," he shouted. Christopher hung his head, consumed by emptiness. In the end, Tony sat once more across from Donna Isabella. Their eyes locked, a mixture of respect and caution. "You're a foreigner here," she said. "But your business will continue," Tony nodded. "That's enough for me." He understood then this land would never embrace him. At best, it offered deals. On the flight home, the mood was subdued. Paulie sat quiet. Christopher drifted half asleep, and Tony stared out the window. His eyes carried disappointment and resignation. The trip had shown him one truth. His roots might be in Italy, but his fate was written in New Jersey. At breakfast that morning, silence hung heavy over the table. Carmela set her fork down and looked at Tony. "You need to keep going to your doctor regularly." A flicker of unease crossed Tony's face. His feelings for Dr. Melfi were becoming increasingly complicated, caught between an attraction he couldn't suppress and the dark truths her words forced him to face. Tony simply nodded but said nothing. Later that day, sitting in Melfi's office, the quiet of the room only amplified the noise in his soul. Tony drew a deep breath and began to speak. "My mother never said one kind thing to me in her life." Melfi listened carefully. "Does that still affect you?" she asked. Tony let out a bitter laugh. "It's what made me who I am. Her lack of love." For a moment his face softened, revealing a wound that never healed. Tony's greatest scar was the love his mother never gave him. This episode also takes Christopher's story in an unexpected direction. To rein in his restless ambition, Tony tries something new. He sends Christopher to an acting class. At first, Christopher mocks the idea, but once he steps on stage, something cracks open inside him. Guided by the instructor, he channels his anger and emotions into the performance. At first, it looks ridiculous. Then his eyes well up. The emptiness inside him suddenly spills out through the act. When Adriana embraces him afterward, he mutters, "Maybe there's something to this." Meanwhile, Richie April grows more restless by the day. On the streets of New Jersey, he insists on enforcing his own rules, refusing to bend to Tony's order. One night at the table, Richie leans forward. "Your rules don't apply to me." Tony narrows his eyes, then answers calmly, "My rules apply to all of us, Richie. Go against them if you want, but you'll pay the price." The silence that follows is suffocating. Everyone knows the tension will eventually erupt. Tony's relationship with Carmela also shifts. She no longer hides her jealousy of Melfi. One evening she turns to Tony. "You don't just see her as a doctor." Tony snaps in irritation but avoids her gaze. Because deep down, Carmela is right. Tony's feelings for Melfi are something he can barely admit to himself. The pressure inside the family is no less tense. During a sit-down with his men, Richie's shadow looms over every face. Polly warns, "The guy's a loose cannon. If you don't rein him in, he's gonna blow us all up." Tony exhales slowly, then replies, "Anyone who can't fall in line has no place here." The words are meant for Richie, but they serve as a warning to everyone at the table. Christopher's acting class scenes become some of the episode's most striking moments. In one exercise pushed by the instructor, he unleashes his fury at an imaginary father. "You never loved me." The line comes from his own truth. When he steps off stage, his eyes are wet. It's a raw moment that shows just how much Christopher mirrors Tony. Both men, shaped by unloving parents, carrying wounds that drive their rage. In the final scene, Tony sits alone in his car. The radio hums an old song, rain-speckled glass blurring his view. His eyes burn with anger, sorrow, and longing. His attraction to Melfi, his bitterness toward his mother, his simmering rage at Richie, all colliding at once elsewhere. Christopher steps onto the stage again, repeating his lines. Adriana watches from the side, her face lit with surprise and pride. The camera lingers on Tony's face, a powerful mafia boss, but inside still a wounded child. Then it shifts to Christopher, a young man eager to rise yet fragile at his core. The night of New Jersey gathers them both under the same shadow. The heavy air of New Jersey once again settled over the Soprano family. In the morning, Tony sat in the kitchen sipping his coffee, lost in silence as Carmela moved about with the clatter of dishes. His expression showed not anger but exhaustion, because in recent days, it wasn't only the tension on the streets. Shadows in his personal life were growing heavier too. That day, Tony went to Dr. Melfi's office. As he stepped inside, he was already weighed down. Melfi looked at him carefully. "You look tired," Tony nodded. "Every day it's the same story. People always want something from me, but no one gives me anything." His voice was low, as though he was trying to suppress the anger rising inside. Then he fixed his eyes on Melfi. "I carry their dreams. I've never lived my own." The words exposed the deep emptiness left over from his childhood. This episode introduces a new character into Tony's life, Davy Scatino. An old high school friend, Davy approaches Tony with a friendly smile. But in his eyes there's another shadow, gambling addiction. Davy asks Tony for help, desperate to be part of the high-stakes game. At first, Tony hesitates. Davy is an ordinary man not suited for the brutal world of the mob, but eventually he opens the door with a curt, "It's your choice." What none of them realize in that moment is how disastrous this decision will become. Davy's first night at the card table is unforgettable. The cards are dealt, smoke drifts through the air. Paulie and Silvio watch him from the corner of their eyes, because newcomers always raise suspicion. Davy plays with excitement but loses. When he rises from the table, he forces a smile. Tony's eyes linger on him, because Tony knows that in the end, Davy will lose far more than money. He'll lose his family and his life. Meanwhile, Richie April is also on the stage. His anger is mounting, his challenge to Tony's authority growing stronger. His relationship with Janice becomes increasingly visible. When Tony realizes his sister is getting close to Richie, his face betrays both fury and concern. Richie is no longer just on the streets, he is weaving himself into Tony's family. Carmela senses her husband's unease. One evening at the dinner table, she looks at him and says, "I can see the storm inside you." Tony averts his gaze, because as always, Carmela's instincts are right. Davy's downfall, Richie's fury, Junior's lingering influence, all are pressing in on Tony's soul. Christopher also steps into focus again in this episode, driven by his restless ambition. At his acting classes, his emotional outbursts on stage reveal his inner turmoil. Adriana watches proudly, but Christopher still feels crushed under Tony's shadow. One night he approaches Tony. "Why don't you let me in on more of the work?" Tony's reply is firm, "Because you haven't learned patience." Christopher's eyes well with tears, but he says nothing. As Davy's gambling debt grows, the peace inside his home collapses. He fights with his wife, lies to his son. When he comes to Tony, pleading, "Give me a little more time," Tony glares at him. "Everyone has a limit, Davy. You passed yours a long time ago." Those words mark the beginning of Davy's collapse. Under New Jersey's gray skies, Tony's world was once again filled with conflicts, both within his family and in his business. But at the center of this episode stood Christopher. His growing desire to break away from the mob path and chase a completely different dream unsettled everyone around him. After a heated argument with Adriana, Christopher meets his cousin Gregory, who has just returned from Hollywood. Gregory is immersed in the film industry, glamorous, dazzling, a completely different world. The more Christopher listens, the more the spark inside him burns. He doesn't want to remain just the guy who roughs people up on the streets and runs errands for Tony. He feels an urge to write, to tell stories, and Gregory's words ignite this passion even further. In one scene, Christopher visits a film set with Gregory, where Jon Favreau is working. The cameras, lights, and actors mesmerize him. With burning ambition, he scribbles notes in his notebook. "I have stories to tell," he says. But in Tony's world, such dreams are nothing more than luxuries. Adriana meets his new obsession with both admiration and unease. Maybe you really can write something, she tells him. Yet deep down, she fears what it might mean if Christopher drifts away from the mob life, the very life that binds them together. When Tony hears about Christopher's Hollywood fixation, his anger boils over. One night he confronts him. Your job isn't chasing dreams. Your job is walking with me. You work for me. Christopher's face fills with both anger and heartbreak. For in Tony's world, there is only violence and hierarchy. While Christopher longs for something else inside, Tony vents his frustrations to Dr. Melfi. That kid's obsessed with Hollywood crap. Melfi responds calmly. Maybe it's his way of finding his own path. You can't choose it for him. Tony's face hardens, for her words remind him of everything beyond his control. The scenes on set are some of the episode's most vibrant. The director's shouts, the rehearsals, the bright lights, it all overwhelms Christopher. But he also begins to sense the falseness within. Hollywood's allure is radiant, yet hollow. In one pivotal moment, Christopher shares pieces of his own story with Jon Favreau, only to realize later that Favreau has stolen them for his script. His face darkens in fury. They stole my life, he cries to Adriana. This marks his breaking point. The world of dreams is just as ruthless as the mob. The episode builds to a powerful confrontation with Tony. Tony glares at him. This is your life. There is no other way. Christopher, unable to hold back tears, responds, I have my own story, Tony. But in Tony's world, those words carry no weight. The final scene shows Christopher alone at home. A blank notebook in front of him, a half-smoked cigarette beside it. He picks up his pen, but no words come. His eyes glaze over, his face full of despair. As the camera pulls back, the grey shadows of New Jersey close in again. His dream is once more trapped between the chains of the mob. The morning in New Jersey rises under the same grey skies. Tony sips his coffee in the kitchen, while Carmela flips through magazines at the table. Their silence clings to the walls of the house. In this episode, the small cracks within the Soprano family foreshadow the larger explosions that lie ahead. At the center stands Carmela's confrontation with her social circle. Sitting in the home of their neighbors, the Cusamanos, Carmela feels the weight of wealth and status more sharply than ever. A tense encounter with Jean Cusamano's sister exposes Carmela's jealousy and dissatisfaction. Back at home, she raises the issue with Tony, who shrugs it off. We're not them. But Carmela's unease lingers. For her, social acceptance is as important as Tony's battles for power in the streets. Meanwhile, Richie April's shadow grows darker. Ignoring Tony's authority, he continues to impose his own ways. In one scene, Richie intimidates Matthew Bevilacqua and Sean Gismonti, dismissing their loyalty to Tony. You're just kids, he sneers. His words plant a seed of doubt in Matthew, a hidden unease about Tony's leadership. Christopher faces yet another breaking point. Torn between Adriana, his dreams, and his place in Tony's world, he tells her one night, "Give me time. I'll write. I'll find my own way." Adriana's eyes fill with hope, though she cannot know if that hope will ever be realized. At Carmela's urging, Tony tries to show his face more in their social circles. But for him, this is torture. Sitting at the dinner table, he senses their eyes probing him. You sit at the same table with me, but you'll never let me belong, he thinks. These moments deepen Tony's own sense of alienation. Richie's aggression continues to spiral out of control. In one scene, sitting with Janice, he spits out disparaging words about Tony. Janice is torn, bound by loyalty to her brother, yet drawn to Richie. Their entanglement sets the stage for a much larger conflict. By the end of the episode, Matthew Bevilacqua's role becomes more pronounced. Young, reckless, and ambitious, he is swayed by Richie's words and his own impatience. His eventual move against Tony may seem small, but it is the spark that threatens to ignite far greater chaos. The night in New Jersey was quiet, but in Tony's world, silence never meant peace. In this episode, the shadow of death, the weight of life, and the questioning of faith fell heavily on everyone. The episode opens with Christopher lying in a hospital bed. After Matthew and Sean's attack, he is caught between life and death. The sharp beeping of monitors, Adriana's panicked eyes, Tony's deep concern. Everything fills the room with suffocating tension. Tony leans toward him, clasps his hand and whispers, "Hold on, nephew, hold on." Behind those words are both love and guilt. Tony knows this world either makes you or buries you. In intensive care, Christopher loses consciousness and slips into an otherworldly experience. He finds himself in a bar, dim and smoky, filled with the dead. They step closer. "You don't belong here. Go back." The vision scars him. When he wakes, he whispers to Adriana, "I saw hell." Tears well in her eyes as she tries to comfort him, but Christopher's face is gripped by fear. In the hospital corridor, Paulie turns to Tony, troubled. "He said hell, Tony, what if it's real?" Tony shrugs it off. "It's just the drugs." But a flicker of doubt crosses his eyes, for he too fears death and what may lie beyond, though he would never admit it. Paulie's fear grows darker. One night he slips into a church, lights a candle, kneels in prayer. His face is marked by guilt, by the weight of sins he now believes he may one day have to answer for. Tony faces another conflict. Carmela lashes out. "This life is dragging us all to hell." Tony explodes, "What am I supposed to do?" "There is no other way." Carmela breaks into tears, for to her this life is not only about money but about the loss of their very souls. Christopher slowly recovers, but the terror of what he saw lingers. Tony insists it was just a dream. Christopher shakes his head. "No, Tony, it was real. I was there, and there's no place for us." The words echo deep inside Tony, though he stays silent. Even imagining such a fate is unbearable. Meanwhile, Richie April lurks in the background, his presence still poisoning the streets. His deepening relationship with Janice adds even more pressure on Tony. Richie is no longer just a threat outside, but within the family itself. The final scene shows Tony sitting alone in his car. His eyes are distant, his face weary. Christopher's words echo, "There's no place for us there." He lights a cigarette, smoke rising into the night. The camera pulls back slowly. New Jersey's night grows heavier, and on Tony's face remain the marks of both faithlessness and fear. The heavy air over New Jersey looked darker still in this episode. For in Tony's world, it wasn't only business collapsing, it was people. At the center of the story is Davy Scatino. Once a family man with a store, a life, stability, now consumed by gambling, he has reached the point of no return. Tony and his crew take advantage, beginning what is called a bust-out. They strip Davy's store bare, selling off everything of value, pocketing the profits. Davy's eyes grow emptier with each passing day. He has surrendered his life to Tony with his own hands. At one point, Davy pleads, "Just give me more time. For my family." Tony's face hardens. "Everyone gets time. Davy, yours is up." These words seal his fate. The only path left is ruin. The camera lingers on empty shelves, then on Davy's hopeless face. At home, Carmela feels the darkness pressing closer than ever. One evening she turns to Tony, fury in her eyes. "Your world seeps into this house." Tony stays silent, but a flicker of guilt betrays him. Deep down he knows she is right. Richie's shadow grows heavier still. His bond with Janice deepens to the point where he speaks of marriage. When Tony hears this, rage consumes him. That man will never be part of this family. Yet Janice clings to Richie, pulling Tony into a deeper inner war, torn between his sister's love and the threat Richie embodies. Paulie and Silvio strip Davy's store with ease, their faces casual. To them, it's just business. As televisions, shoes, electronics vanish from the shelves, Paulie sneers the American dream. For Davy, that dream has become a nightmare. In therapy, Tony admits, sometimes everything feels out of control. Dr. Melfi meets his eyes. Until you save yourself, You can't save those around you. Tony turns away. Deep inside, he knows she is right. The final image shows Davy sitting alone in his car, his son's bicycle in the trunk, a bitter symbol of everything he has lost. Meanwhile, Tony smokes in his backyard, lost in thought. As Davy's life collapses, Tony shoulders the weight of his own. The camera pulls back. New Jersey's night wraps both men in the same darkness. The clouds over New Jersey were heavy, like the shadows over Tony Soprano's soul. In this episode, Tony found himself trapped not only by the streets but by the law. The story opens with Tony meeting his lawyers. The FBI's pressure is mounting, legal troubles tightening around him. His attorney warns Tony, you need to be more careful. You have public businesses. If you don't want the spotlight, you need to stay low for a while. Tony smirks bitterly. I'm not the kind of man who stays low. Yet the words strike a fear he cannot dismiss. Talk of house arrest begins. For Tony, being confined to his home is a humiliation. He thrives on visibility, on showing the world he is present. Being trapped indoors is a prison sentence in itself. In one scene, Tony sits in the yard. Carmela approaches. Maybe this will be good for you. He snaps, what good is there in caging a lion? Carmela turns away, her husband's fury spilling into the home. Junior Soprano also takes a key turn. While dealing with his own trial, he collapses during a doctor's visit. In the hospital, his frailty becomes clear. When Tony sees his uncle in that state, his expression shifts, resentment tangled with reluctant compassion. Meanwhile, Paulie and Silvio keep business going. Goods from Davy's store are still being moved, but Tony's absence is felt. Among the men, whispers spread. With the boss staying back, will things fall apart? Paulie snaps, Tony's word is still law. But the rumors of house arrest gnaw at loyalty. In therapy, Melfi suggests, maybe this is an opportunity to face yourself without running. For a moment, Tony's face goes blank. Her words hit their mark. But then he erupts. There's no stopping for me. One evening, Tony watches children riding bikes outside. A flicker of sorrow passes over his face. He remembers freedom as a boy now gone, replaced by the cage of his own making. The final scene shows Tony sitting alone in his backyard. A grey sweatsuit on his body, a cigarette in his hand, his eyes distant. The camera pulls back, revealing the walls around his house. This is no longer just a home. For Tony Soprano, it has become a prison. The clouds over New Jersey hung heavier, darker than ever. Whispers floated through the streets, and within the family, tension spread like an invisible web. In this episode, Tony's two worlds, business and family, intertwine, culminating in a bloody turning point. One morning, Tony sat at the kitchen table with his coffee, while Carmela sat silently across from him. The silence in the house was louder than any words left unspoken. Carmela's eyes burned with fatigue and anger. How much longer can this go on, Tony? She asked. Tony didn't look up. His mind was elsewhere, on Richie April. Richie's uncontrollable rage and his relationship with Janice were disrupting everything. Richie was spending more and more time at Janice's house, even speaking of marriage. When Tony heard this, his jaw clenched. Sitting at a table with Paulie and Silvio, he crushed his cigarette into the ashtray. That bastard will never be part of my sister's life. Silvio nodded, but Janice doesn't listen. Tony shook his head in fury. To him, this was not just family business, it was a matter of honor. Richie dreamed of a future with Janice, but continued to provoke Tony. One evening, during an argument in the kitchen, Richie lost control and struck Janice. She hit the floor, her eyes filled with both pain and fury. Richie dismissed his violence as if it were normal. But for Janice, this was the final straw. Moments later in the living room, Janice walked quietly into the kitchen, pulled a gun from the drawer. Richie sat on the couch watching TV, unaware. Her hands trembled, her eyes hardened with both fear and resolve. She raised the gun and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the house. Richie collapsed to the floor, eyes staring into nothing. Janice stood frozen, the weapon in her shaking hands, but her face was stone. She had freed herself from Richie's shadow. When the news reached Tony, he exhaled deeply. With Paulie and Furio, he went to Janice's house. Richie's lifeless body lay on the floor. Janice's face was pale but eerily calm. Tony approached and spoke simply. "Pack your bags. We'll take care of the rest." In his eyes, Janice saw no anger, only acceptance. For Tony had wanted Richie gone as well. Paulie and Furio wrapped Richie's body in a rug and carried it to the car. The camera lingered on their cold precision, while outside Tony lit a cigarette. Smoke rose into the dark sky, his face marked not with triumph but exhaustion. A burden had been lifted, yet a new shadow had fallen. Carmela's anger with Tony also sharpened. She confronted him. "I'm only here for the kids. I'm not your wife." Tony sat in silence, but guilt flickered briefly in his eyes, for her words cut deeper than he would admit. Meanwhile, Junior, still under house arrest, warned him, "Your enemies will never end." His words echoed the theme of the hour. Richie was gone, but storm still loomed. The final scene was striking. Tony sat alone in his backyard, cigarette in hand, the night silent. The camera drew close to his face, etched with both victory and loss. Richie's death had secured his authority, but it had dragged his own family into blood. Upstairs, Janice packed her bags, wiping away tears. Downstairs, Tony stared into the night sky. And once again, the heavy night of New Jersey descended upon them. Season finale. The weight of betrayal. The summer night over New Jersey was thick and suffocating. But inside Tony Soprano, something even heavier stirred. Suspicion. In the season finale, the storm in his mind would turn into a bloody reckoning. The episode opens at the Sopranos' breakfast table. Carmela prepares food. Tony sits with weary eyes, pushing his fork without appetite. His body feels unwell, his stomach unsettled, but deeper still it is his instincts gnawing at him. His torment has a name: Pussy Bon Pensiero. For months, whispers claimed he was working with the FBI. Tony's heart refused to believe it. Pussy wasn't just another man in the crew. He was a friend, a brother, a piece of Tony's past. But the doubts never ceased. One meeting, Tony stares into Pussy's eyes. There he sees not warmth, but a stranger's coldness. Pussy cracks jokes, laughs loudly, but Tony feels only dread. Silvio and Paulie share the same unease. The silence at the table betrays their growing suspicion. Tony's dreams become haunting. Feverish, tossing in bed, he sees strange visions. In one, he walks along the shore where a fish emerges from the water. Its mouth opens and speaks in Pussy's voice. "I talked, Tony." Tony wakes in a cold sweat. The dream is no longer just fear, it is confession. Determination hardens on his face. With Silvio and Paulie, he breaks the silence. "We know now." They bow their heads. The truth is settled. Pussy betrayed them. To confirm, Tony lures him onto a boat. The scene is drowned in silence. Waves slapping, the wind howling. Pussy arrives with an uneasy smile. As the boat drifts into open water, Tony looks at him and asks, "Got anything to say?" Pussy hesitates, tries to deny. Tears well in Tony's eyes, for this is not just betrayal, but the death of friendship. Finally, Pussy admits, "They had me, Tony. I had no choice." Tony closes his eyes. The execution is inevitable. Silvio pours him a drink. They share one last toast. Tony whispers, "You were my friend." Pussy's eyes hold both fear and resignation. Shots ring out. His body crumples to the deck. The camera lingers on Tony's face. Not rage, but grief. They roll the body into the sea. Paulie and Silvio move with mechanical detachment, but Tony's eyes remain on the water. He has lost not only a soldier, but a piece of his soul. Back home, Carmela greets him at the door. She sees the exhaustion in his face, but asks nothing. Years of silence have taught her well. "Dinner's ready," she says softly. Tony bows his head. The final images are heavy. Tony walks through the house, his children's voices in the background. Upstairs, alone in his room, he sits on the bed staring into emptiness. In his mind, the fish's voice echoes, "I talked, Tony." His eyes hold no tears, but his heart is shattered. The last shot. Tony alone in the kitchen, gazing out the window. New Jersey's night presses down, street lamps flickering dimly. On his face, both victory and loss. He has destroyed a traitor, but the cost is etched deep into his soul. The camera pulls back, the house shrinking, darkness swallowing it whole. The season ends in silence, where power, betrayal, and loneliness converge.